Like what are some of the revelations you have had over the past 14 months of doing this?
This one is that's a particularly like difficult question to answer when I first think about it. And it's because the more I hone in on that answer, it is not really a monetary answer. Because I thought going into this, I was trying to figure out how money works and how the economy works and all that. And there is all this fascinating stuff to learn about how corrupt it is and how interesting. But I think the thing that is most startling to me is how involved covert intelligence agencies are in the financial systems. And not just directly in the financial systems, but indirectly as well. And that's, I mean, I've already talked about it at length, but that's why I talk about it so much, because I don't think that anyone realizes, for good reason, just how powerful and involved the various arms of those agencies are. Because, and if you just look at Jeffrey Epstein's network as the one prime example, everyone knows about his trafficking operation, and they sort of, the buck kind of stops there. But they don't realize that before being a human trafficker, he was an arms dealer. And as an arms dealer, you're dealing with the black market sale of arms, but you're also dealing with all kinds of money laundering, because every single sale has money on the other side. And anytime you're doing, and so obviously his trafficking network has all sorts of money laundering going on as well. And there's a whole concept to talk about. He wasn't as involved in drugs, but you know, drugs are one of the other obvious ones there. And all of that black market operation, which is basically the bread and butter of intelligence agencies, is their dark secret. That all involves this whole shadow banking economy that interfaces directly with the mainstream banking economy. And then it interfaces directly with politicians that are sort of, in many ways, incentivized to keep those flows open, because the black market is critical to the functioning of our, you know, the front of our markets as well. And so in starting to unpack just how incentivized the intelligence agencies are to have a large amount of influence in our financial system, it really started to open my eyes to like how gray the line is between the front and the back of house of our mainstream financial institutions. And one obvious example that I come back to over and over again is one that was in front of all of our faces. Is there were many articles published. Most of us saw a certain form of the article that said Jeffrey Epstein referred a whole bunch of wealthy clientele to JP Morgan. And that was why JP Morgan had this kind of lawsuit going on, and Jamie Dimon had to prove that he didn't really know about it. And that we kind of glossed over the fact that that article just said that Bill Gates and Sergey Brin and all these other billionaires needed a referral to open a bank account at JP Morgan. Like, you can just walk into the front door and ask to open a bank account, right? Everyone knows how to open a bank account at JP Morgan. So what does a billionaire need a referral to JP Morgan to do? Well, what is Jeffrey Epstein good at doing? And the answer is laundering money, right? And if that's still not clicking, if you've ever bought weed before or any illicit substance, you realize that you don't, well, now you can just walk into a store, but if it's illegal, you can't just walk into a store and buy it. You have to know a guy. And in order to be able to like be invited to the house to buy the weed, or like to know the guy, you have to have that reputation system of like, they'll vouch for you that you're not a Fed. Right. And so you got to know a guy that knows the guy, so you can go and get that weed. And that is the mechanism that we're seeing in that reporting that they're glossing over, is they don't need Jeffrey Epstein to help them open a legitimate bank account. They need Jeffrey Epstein's referral to the back door of the financial institution, JP Morgan, the biggest one in the world, because he will refer them to the back door, where he will say, this guy is corrupt and sleazy enough and evil enough that if you let him in the back door, he'll play the game, because I've probably got some compromising information on him. And when you start to think about the scope of what's like, Sergey Brin founded Google, right? Like Sergey Brin, and I'm sure it's not just him. It's like Bill Gates, the outsized influence of Bill Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He literally just ran half the policy of our COVID response, and he's getting a backdoor referral to the banking services of JP Morgan from Jeffrey Epstein. And that's where you start to realize that, no, it's not just that the money is broken. It is that like everything is broken, and everyone using the money is broken. And they are now, it is just as much a tool for the black markets as for the front markets. And the amount of money flows that are flowing in these black markets that we clearly aren't being told about is astronomically high. And I think that most people never really think about how valuable the global child trafficking market is, for example, or how valuable the global drug market is. And in that case, it's like, why is the global drug market so valuable? Well, it's because of the war on drugs. And right. And as they were declaring the war on drugs, they were smuggling cocaine into the United States with CIA planes from Nicaragua.
Solution.
Right.
Just like you said.
Right. And so that is the most surprising part about the financial system that I learned is like that intelligence agency to organized crime pipeline that turns the black market and the front market into this one kind of like pool that's in front of all of our faces that none of us ever think about.
The word crime dissolves here because crime is that which goes against the laws of the white market, right? Yeah. But if that is integrated to the black market, then, I mean, you're almost saying statism is the ultimate form of organized crime.
I would argue that organized crime captured our government entirely somewhere around the end of World War II. And you can look it up on Wikipedia easily and then do deeper digging. Operation Underworld was an operation by which the U.S. government, a ship blew up in port during World War II, and they were worried it was the Germans that had sabotaged this boat. It was actually probably organized crime themselves because they later openly took credit for it. But the Jewish mob and the Italian mafia controlled all the ports because they controlled all the labor unions at the time. And so the government didn't really have an effective way to actually lock down the ports and secure them. And so they just hired the mob and the mafia, who at the time were actually one organization because Meyer Lansky had created what they called the National Crime Syndicate. So all of American organized crime got control over the entire Eastern Seaboard during World War II to lock it down and keep it safe. But if you know anything about organized crime, you would know that their favorite thing to do is to smuggle illegal things in and out of ports. And right. And so right from the end of World War II and all throughout World War II, like the CIA, before it was even founded, the OSS was already working with organized crime on their very first missions. The CIA's very first mission was to use their mafia contacts to overthrow the government of Italy to ensure that they didn't get a communist. And instead they got a pro-American dictator, so to speak. And they did it by passing bags of cash to mafia guys who pass bags of cash to politicians. And ever since, basically in every decade, in every operation that the CIA has done, they have been allied very closely with organized crime because the whole point of those intelligence agencies is plausible deniability, right? You don't need an intelligence agency to do something legal. You just send the army, right? Or you send a government diplomat or whatever it is. You need covert intelligence agencies to do something that you don't want anyone to know you're doing. And in order to do that, you outsource it to a corporation or a private company or to organized crime. And usually those are three things are kind of all one big pool. And so they've been paired up ever since the start. And like Iran-Contra is just one example. Jeffrey Epstein is just one example. But now you look at our politics today and you start to realize that, well, if Jeffrey Epstein is hanging out with Bill Clinton, then who do you think is in charge of the White House, right? And then you look at like, so if Hunter Biden's laptop is about to come out right before the 2020 election, what was the story that swept the Hunter Biden laptop under the rug? It was a letter that was released by the intelligence community, essentially the CIA and buddies. And they had 51, I think, of their like former top brass, like ex-heads of CIA, ex-heads of NSA, et cetera, all signed this letter. And when you read the letter itself, it clearly states in it, we have no evidence whatsoever that the Hunter Biden laptop is Russian disinformation. But based on all of our combined experience as intelligence agents, which is like professional liars, we would suspect that it could be Russian disinformation. And so it might be Russian disinformation, though we have no evidence. And that is very much what they say in the letter. And when you look at who signed it, it's like the dudes that lied to us about Guantanamo Bay and torture programs, the dudes that lied to us about NSA surveillance programs. Those are the first two names on the list of people that signed it. And so it was very literally the CIA produced a report that made it seem as though it could be Russian disinformation. And that was enough to give the newspapers all the headline, 51 former intel agents decry it as Russian disinformation so they could sweep it under the rug. And so that is very clearly the CIA tipping the scales on behalf of their candidate that they wanted in right in time for the 2020 election. So you start to put it all together and you're like, well, you know, organized crime actually might be calling the shots in a bigger way than we realize.
Fuck, dude, that is such...
That's kind of my most recent crusade is digging into organized crime and intelligence agencies and where the line is. And it's mostly like, right now I'm kind of stuck on the CIA in America and the Mossad in Israel because they've been very joined at the hip since CIA was founded and since Israel was founded. And there's a much harder one to research around Saudi Arabia and around Russia and around China. But yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
I reminded of something comic Dave Smith said where the state is a mafia parading itself as a human rights organization.
Bingo.
And, you know, I had this epiphany a long time ago watching the movie Gangs of New York. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
I don't think I've seen it, actually.
It's a Martin Scorsese film. It's got DiCaprio and Daniel Day-Lewis in it. It's a really good movie, actually. It's one of my favorites. But it's just the founding of the city of New York, but it's a lot of gang warfare, basically, is the history of that, as is the history of every land, I think, anywhere. And yeah, my epiphany at the end of that movie was like, oh, that's what government is. It's just the biggest gang in the land. It's just the gang that won, basically.
Exactly.
And so it doesn't stop being, you know, we would call a gang an organized crime syndicate, right? If it's a big gang, if it's the mafia. But as soon as it becomes government, it somehow self-legitimizes. But it doesn't stop engaging in the activities that they got it there, right?
It walks like a gang and it talks like a gang and it extorts you like a gang and it has a monopoly on force like a gang, then it's probably a gang.
Right, yes.
Yeah. And I can't think of a better reason to want a decentralized currency that is not government controlled than to realize that a literal criminal enterprise is controlling our government and our currency supply.
Yes. Oh. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.